Hello and welcome to this WION Live Broadcast. I'm Kate Fisher in Washington, D.C. and these are the headlines of the hour. The battle for the Ukrainian besieged port city of Mariupol is reaching a decisive phase ahead of an anticipated Russian offensive. French President Emmanuel Macron accosted by irate health workers over pay and working conditions as he met with locals in the eastern French city of Mulhouse. An explosion rips through a building near Sidon in southern Lebanon, killing one person and wounding 7. The death toll from the strongest storm to hit the Philippines this year rises to 42 as rescuers recovered more bodies from villages devastated by rain-induced landslides. US inflation continued to surge in March, sending the consumer price index up 8.5% over the past 12 months, its largest increase in more than 4 decades. Here in Washington, US President Joe Biden has introduced an executive order to bring in new restrictions on the sales of so-called ghost guns. This comes as the administration faces growing pressure to reduce gun deaths and violent crime in the United States. Under the new rules, weapon kits that can be assembled into a working firearm at home will be subject to the same requirements as commercially available fully assembled guns. This will include background checks of prospective buyers and serial numbers on each rifle. Now, before delving deeper, let's get a rough idea of what a ghost gun and how it works in the US. Ghost guns are privately made firearms that are not marked with a serial number. This makes it difficult for law enforcement to trace them if they're used during a crime. The rifle kits are easily available online, or they can be purchased from licensed gun dealers without needing a background check. These kits are easy to use and can be assembled into fully fledged weapons in less than an hour. President Biden announced the new restrictions at a White House gathering on Monday, while stressing that he was not opposed to the right to bear arms, which is allowed in the Second Amendment to the Constitution. President Biden criticised the powerful National Rifle Association gun lobby for having described his proposal as extreme.
The NRA called this rule I'm about to announce extreme. Extreme. But let me ask you, is it extreme to protect police officers? Extreme to protect our children? Extreme to keep guns out of the hands of people who couldn't even pass a background check? Look, the idea that someone on a terrorist list could purchase one of these guns is extreme. It isn't extreme, just basic common sense.
President Biden, meanwhile, has also named former US Attorney from Ohio, Steve Dettelbach, as his nominee to lead the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, or the ATF. Due to a lack of serial numbers, there is no concrete data on how many ghost guns are now being circulated in the US. But police forces say that they are noticing a big uptick in the number of ghost guns from the weapons that they are seizing. In 2021, there were around 20,000 suspected ghost guns reported to the ATF. That's a tenfold increase from 2016's figures. The announcement comes as the US continues to witness a massive surge in gun violence. 4 people, including 2 teens, were shot after a baseball game in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, while in Illinois, 6 people were found injured after a shooting occurred in a residential neighborhood. Meanwhile, American teenagers are being recruited to help ease the migrant crisis on the Mexico-US border, and money is proving a great temptation. Here are the details.
A growing number of U.S. teenagers in communities from Texas to California are being recruited to transport record numbers of migrants apprehended at the southwest border. That's according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
So historically, in the El Paso sector, we've always seen the criminal organizations that operate here use predominantly Mexican juveniles as foot guides or as coyotes.
Carlos Rivera is a public affairs spokesperson for the El Paso, Texas sector of the U.S. Border Patrol.
Recently, about fiscal year 21 and on, we've seen an increase of our encounters when it comes to drivers, U.S. citizen teenage drivers.
Like Mexican children who have long guided migrants into the United States, the U.S. teens are told they are unlikely to face legal consequences because they are minors. The young drivers can earn hundreds of dollars per migrant, a meaningful sum of money in a place like Sunland Park, New Mexico, which is a working-class town with 3 times the national poverty rate. Around 1 in 4 drivers caught smuggling migrants last year in the area around Sunland Park were children, nearly all U.S. citizens, according to U.S. Border Patrol. One local public defender told Reuters that unless the child has been in trouble before, most juvenile cases result in probation until the age of 21. But the job can be dangerous, and federal authorities in New Mexico appear keen to crack down on the juvenile drivers. Gerardo Galvan, a Border Patrol agent in charge of the Sunland Park area, noticed the rise in juvenile drivers in 2021 after a 14-year-old fled agents and crashed into a Border Patrol van.
They're told that nothing's going to happen to them. And they're told that if they go fast enough, we're going to stop pursuing them. And, it's all dependent on time of day, the traffic, and near the schools, which is always a concern for us because we don't want to have any accidents.
Of concerns are incidents like a 2020 crash in which an El Paso teen wrecked his Chevy sedan, crammed with 10 people after a pursuit by Border Patrol. 4 local teens died, together with 3 migrants. ACLU attorney Shaw Drake said Border Patrol should be mindful of the risks of a hot pursuit.
If Border Patrol itself knows that such a high percentage of the drivers of these vehicles in particular areas are children being recruited in this way, then that should hedge against them conducting these types of dangerous vehicle pursuits.
Sunland Park Mayor Javier Perea sees no easy fix.
I think this is a big issue because first and foremost, the last thing that we want to do is criminalize our youth. We don't want our youth to become, scarred or to, have consequences that prohibit them from serving in the military service if that's a path they want to proceed into the future, or being able to get certain jobs into the future that can get them out of poverty if they're in poverty. So it does have an effect in the community.
Moving on to Russia, which has appointed a new commander for the special operations in Ukraine. A man who's known as the Butcher of Syria, General Alexander Dvornikov. Experts believe that the appointment signals a change in Russian operations on the ground. Russia's strategic operations in Ukraine have been facing several roadblocks, and that's one reason why a top FSB intelligence official has been reportedly moved to a high-security jail in Moscow. Sources indicate that Putin is purging his secret services over the botched Ukraine invasion. 68-year-old Colonel General Sergei Beseda was the head of the 5th Service of the Federal Security Service. He was previously under house arrest, but now he's reportedly been placed in pre-trial detention in the notorious Lefortovo prison. There are claims that he will face major charges for intelligence failings. The move's reportedly a warning to other senior Putin aides, all of whom are now expected to take the blame for the huge Russian death toll in Ukraine. Beseda has been a long-time trusted Putin Secret Service official. Russia has not confirmed his arrest or detention in Lefortovo prison. But experts believe that Russia has not been able to succeed in Ukraine so far because they've lacked a frontline commander. Instead, the war's reportedly being directed by military leadership sitting in Moscow. But it's not just the Russian military leadership which is being shaken up in Ukraine. The United States is also appointing a new commander of NATO allied forces in Europe. As per a report in the Wall Street Journal newspaper, Army General Christopher Cavoli will command all NATO forces in Europe. He's the current commander of the US Army in Europe, and it should be noted that NATO comprises some 100,000 US troops. There are another 40,000 troops from NATO allies. General Christopher Cavoli will be replacing Air Force General Ted Walters after he rotates out of the role this summer. Walters' term as commander was extended only to oversee NATO's initial response to the war in Ukraine. Moreover, Army Lieutenant General Brian Fenton will replace retiring General Richard Clark as head of US Special Operations Command, which oversees special operations all around the world.
Prise de contact avec l'OAC, Oscar Alpha Charlie. Bravo. Un bond de 20 mètres d'avant. Prise de contact avec l'OAC, Oscar Alpha Charlie. Bravo. Un bond de 20 mètres d'avant. Prise de contact avec l'OAC, Oscar Alpha Charlie. Bravo, un bond de 20 mètres d'avant.
Now to some breaking news happening in New York City. Several people have been shot and multiple explosives have been found at a subway station in the city. Susan Tehrani is there. Susan, can you tell us the latest on this?
That's right. So several people, as you mentioned, have now been confirmed shot. They've been transferred to the hospital, and several undetonated devices have been found inside train stations and subway stations in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. This morning, the Fire Department of New York, the FDNY, announced early morning. The FDNY said that it received a call around 8:30 a.m. local time, and emergency personnel then responded to that station on location, and they said that several undetonated devices were also found. It's not clear what those detonated devices are. The NYPD has now advised pedestrians also to avoid that vicinity of Brooklyn. Sunset Park, 8:30 in the morning, of course, is rush hour. It was a very busy time during the commute of not only the train but also pedestrian traffic in and around Brooklyn during that time. Also, the local train stations, for those who are in New York, it's the DN and R train services. They are currently suspended, not only in Brooklyn, but also in Manhattan as well. As you can see, we are getting live shots, and there are visuals that are coming in on the scene as well. Some were very gruesome, of individuals on the subway platform, from eyewitness accounts of people lying on the platform with blood scattered on the platform of the subway station. Individuals, as we know, have been transferred to nearby hospitals. We don't know whether or not there have been any fatalities as of yet. There were unconfirmed reports that possibly the numbers are in. We're not going to know for sure as of now. It's safe to say that the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, currently has COVID. He has not spoken yet. We will possibly, for sure, hear an announcement from him in the near future. But the responders to this attack, if you may, an incident, are going to be widespread because of those undetonated devices. They will be counterterrorism responders because of the fatalities and casualties. Of course, they will be ETA responders, and then, of course, because of the nature of the attack, the NYPD and the fire department, they will be responding as well. This was 8:30 in the morning, around 8:36. This was around rush hour. This was the time when people were going to work, and this was, this is a time when offices are starting to open up again. So subway stations and the subways are very crowded at this time. This is not COVID time anymore, where, the subways aren't as packed early in the morning. The city is, for the most part, up and running. So it's significant to note that the timing of this incident, this attack, which we still don't know whether or not they are related or not. On the one hand, there was a shooting. On the other hand, we have undetonated devices that were found, as I mentioned, on these subway trains. So a lot that's happening at the same time. We'll know if they are related or not, but these are trains that are usually extremely packed at this hour, as I mentioned. We'll have to see how the number of casualties will develop as we get more news. But it's also important to note that right now, not only are these subway stations not running, but the pedestrian traffic in and around Sunset Park, Brooklyn, has been also closed, and also car traffic, vehicle traffic has also been disrupted and closed around that area of Brooklyn as well.
And Susan, we've just been speaking about the problem of gun violence in America, and President Biden yesterday trying to introduce more controls on ghost guns, yet this is a problem that we just see all too often in the US.
Right, and it's, this is just so early on into this incident. It just happened. We got the news almost an hour ago, and the FDNY really got the phone call an hour ago. So it's hard to tell whether or not this was a one-off shooting by an individual. Was this a coordinated terrorist incident? Was this something that was planned from before? Was this something personal that got out of hand? Were there devices used? Were there guns used? So, it really, the timing is really peculiar. You're absolutely right. At a time when President Biden did talk about putting laws and bans on those ghost guns, so to say, guns that basically devices that people can make on their own, putting parts of guns together. They're known as ghost guns. And and using that on the one hand, and on the other hand, you know, the other side of the argument where the mental health issue has really been on the forefront after 2 years of isolation with COVID, and how people weren't able to really seek help because of the amount of mental health issues that they had due to the problems that they face, not only regarding health insurance and other issues. So, you know, on the one hand, you have the gun problem. On the other hand, you have the mental health issue problem. On the other hand, you have the homeless problem here in New York as well. So there's a myriad of issues that the city has been dealing with. And of course, the high crime rate, this falls into all of that. And you have a mayor that just took office. It's his first 100 days, and something like this happens. And he has COVID right now, so that's something to bear in mind as well. So, you know, we'll have to see how he wants to interact with his administration at this point. So now we
so many unanswered questions, as you say, Susan.
Yeah. So I did just want to let you know that.
Yeah, so many unanswered questions. So many questions still to be answered, Susan, as you say. And also, you know, New York City, unfortunately, has had tragedies, as we know, in the past, and yet again they're going to have to brace themselves, it seems, for another terrible incident.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's no irony that we just actually commemorated the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and you really cannot not talk about how every time something like this happens, no matter how minimal or how small, whether or not it's an attack, it's gun violence, it's something like this. I mean, this is going to be very huge. At this point, we know that dog squads have been called on the job. The area has been barricaded. We know a manhunt is now underway for the gunman, who has been described as wearing a gas mask and an orange construction vest. We know 4 of the victims have now been found around that 36th Street subway station in Sunset Park, another at the 25th Street station, again, a local place, Greenwood Heights, just before 8:30 a.m. And, you know, with all these questions that remain, all of these things that happen, everyone remembers 9/11. So this is a place, this is a location that something like this, the biggest terrorist attack in the United States, really did happen. So that aspect is really not lost. And that you have the more recent incidents of crime, not only here in New York, but across urban areas in America, happening one after the other, where people are just in a state of high alert, not only on subway stations and platforms, but just on the street in general, looking over their shoulders. And then you have something like this happen. And, you know, this comes at a time when the mayor of New York, the new mayor, Eric Adams, was really trying to convince people that subways are safe. You know, one of the things that he did while taking office was, excuse me, not only get on buses, but get on the subway and talk to people and say, what are your concerns? And people were saying, well, we don't like the homeless population laying down on subways. We don't like people harassing us. And he was saying, you know, how he would take care of that, how the subway system in New York is one of the hubs of the city, is how people get around. People shouldn't be afraid to go underground. And people were concerned about just, you know, regular pocket picking, so to say, or getting harassed by individuals and whatnot. And then you have something like this happen. So the population's confidence, really, in security, in quality of life, in safety for themselves, for their families, all of this is now in question. Not to mention, as you said, the questions that remain on what the motives of this person was. Now we know, by the way, the latest coming in is 13 people have been injured in that shooting.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to ask you, Susan. For people who may be just tuning in and learning about this ongoing situation in that subway station in Brooklyn in New York, can you just tell us the facts that we know at the moment? Obviously, there are a lot of things we can speculate about, but what do we know so far about what's happened?
So at around 8:30 a.m. local time here in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, the fire department, FDNY, received a call for a shooting incident in the subway station. The latest we know now is at least 13 people have been injured during a shooting incident at that subway station in New York City's Brooklyn Bureau. This is according to authorities. It was at around 8:27 a.m. when police responded to a 911 call of a person shot in the subway, and the city fire department gave the injuries toll. This is according to ABC News, saying that we know at least 5 people had been shot initially, but now we know that that number has gone up to 13. 13 people have been injured, and we do have a tweet from New York Governor Kathy Hochul saying that she has been briefed on the developing situation in Brooklyn. First responders are on the scene, and we will work with the MTA, that's the subway station, that's the transportation system authorities here, subway and train, and also the bus system as well, NYPD, to provide updates as the investigation continue. There is a manhunt going on for the gunman who fired those shots. We still don't know if it was on the subway platform, if it was on the train. We do know that several undetonated devices were also found. Again, we don't know whether it was on the train or on the subway platform when that 911 call was made. But dogs are investigating. Dog squads have been called in, and also bomb squads have also been called in. Pedestrian traffic has been closed in and around that area. Vehicles cannot trespass, understandably, and also those train stations and those trains have been disrupted and have been stopped for now. And this is, again, this happened at rush hour. It's still around almost 10 a.m. local time. It is at a time when a lot of offices and a lot of workplaces are open. These are individuals that were possibly going to work during that time. These are trains that work very heavily during that time, so there were a lot of people on these trains commuting. This was not sort of a time where it was COVID times where there was no one on the train. This was a heavy traffic time, heavy traffic hour, rush hour.
Susan, thank you so much for those updates. Please stay where you are, because this story is clearly going to be developing. For now, from me in Washington, though, that is goodbye, and I'll pass you to Eric, who is in the studio.
Well, thank you very much. You are watching WION World is One, and this is developing story from New York City. And we are receiving reports of multiple people being shot in a Brooklyn subway station, and several undetonated devices were also found at the location. And this is ongoing investigation by the police department in New York City. Now, according to the fire officials and 3 law enforcement officers, at least 5 people were said to have been shot by a man about 5 feet 5 inches tall and 180 pounds, who was wearing a gas mask and an orange construction vest. And this is according to senior law enforcement officials in New York City. Several law enforcement sources said the shooter may have thrown a device before opening fire at the 36th Street and 4th Avenue station in Sunset Park around 8:30 a.m. today. Now, the extent of a victim's injuries was not clear at this moment, but according to our correspondent Susan Teherani, who will be joining us shortly, She says that the number of those injured is 13. Susan Teherani, if you're still on, probably you can begin by telling us more updates on this unfolding situation.
Yeah, Eric, as you mentioned, this is a developing situation. We're getting news as it comes, a shooting during rush hour here in New York. Bureau of Brooklyn in Sunset Park at the subway station. 911 call was made to the fire department of New York. First responders were at the scene immediately afterwards. We do know now that 13 people have been injured during that shooting incident. And as I mentioned, at around 8:27, that's when the police got that call and they responded. The individual is still at large. There's a manhunt going on for that shooter. But what is also concerning, and there are bomb squads and dog squads on the scene, was that investigators did find several undetonated devices. We still don't know what those undetonated devices were. We are told that they were on the train. Again, we cannot confirm that, whether or not these several undetonated devices were either on the train or on the subway platform. Were they found in other stations, or were they at the Sunset Park station? Again, those are questions that need to be responded. Also, we now know that the N and R line power is off as police search for the suspect. Now, this incident happened at other train lines. When we know that the N and R line power is off, these are other subway lines in New York that cross all the way to Manhattan. They are extremely populated and very popular subway lines that go all across from Brooklyn to Queens to the Bronx to Manhattan. So the fact that these two subway lines, power lines, are off means that this manhunt is very widespread across New York City. They're not just looking for this individual in that vicinity of Brooklyn, but the manhunt has now expanded to other boroughs as well. In the last hour and a half where we got this news, that means Queens, Manhattan, the Bronx, and of course Brooklyn as well. Mayor Eric Adams has COVID, so he is monitoring the situation from City Hall, we are told, but he cannot go there and respond to the situation and have the normal press conference that a mayor would have in this situation because of his COVID diagnosis. We did hear from Kathy Hochul via a tweet. She said that she's working with the MTA, which is the transportation department here in New York, and she's also working with the NYPD, and she will give us updates. So that's the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul. We heard from Eric Adams, but we do know that right now, because of those undetonated bombs and because of the people and the number of individuals injured, we still don't know if there are any fatalities yet, that this is not only a counterterrorism operation, it's also an NYPD and a law enforcement operation as well. They are working hand in hand to figure out what the motives were, what the aspirations were for this incident that happened at a very busy time, rush hour in New York City.
All right, Susan Teherani, stay with me because I want more updates on the unfolding situation in New York City. And if you're just joining us live, this is live in New York City. Now, in regard to the multiple people shot at the 36th Street subway station in Brooklyn, there are no active explosive devices at this time. And this is according to the police department in New York City. Any witnesses are asked to call. Please stay clear of the area. More provided information will be given when that is made available. And this is a tweet from the New York Police Department. They've issued an advisory to all New Yorkers to stay away from this Brooklyn area following this shooting that occurred at 8:30 a.m. local time. Susan Teherani, this is a busy street, so to speak. Has the area been cordoned off, and what is the current activity going on at that place?
A very busy street, Sunset Park, Brooklyn, really known for large activity, large pedestrian activity, really a place where a lot of families also live. But it's not only a place where it's residential, there's a lot of commercial activity in that part of Brooklyn as well. No, it hasn't been cordoned off, but it didn't really have that much, perhaps, this kind of activity in the last year and a half or so because of COVID restrictions. But in the last few months, really, people are coming and going, and a lot of people and individuals moved back to the city because offices and workplaces have been open and people are, you know, understandably going to and from work. So this is a hub. This is Sunset Park train station is really a hub, not only for people who are coming to work, but a lot of people were also from that train station leaving and coming into Manhattan to go to work during that hour, 8:30 a.m. Really a busy time, understandably. We are hearing right now that regarding that multiple shooting, as you mentioned, no active explosive devices have been found at this time. We don't know whether or not they have been undetonated by law enforcement or whether or not, you know, that was the case when they were found or not. But what's concerning right now is that the suspect is still at large, and again, one of two of the very main train lines in New York, the NNR train, are out of power, and the search is going on. So not only there's activity as we're getting images coming in and around that Sunset Park vicinity with bomb squads and law enforcement, but now we know when this manhunt is happening on the line of the NNR that all of New York really is an active search vicinity because of this individual, and the fact that he was wearing a gas mask now, you know, raises a lot of questions and concerns.
Susan Teherani, I know you have mentioned this before, but gun violence seems to be a problem in the United States. What is stoking this problem? What are some of the issues that Americans are facing right now? You know, having a spike in gun violence and having a spike in such cases as this.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see what the motives were for this particular incident on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, you have the issue of gun violence, despite the fact that New York really does have very strict gun laws. But New York right now does have a very big crime problem. And the issue with gun violence is twofold. One is the easy accessibility to guns by individuals who have mental issues, mental problems. And then on the other hand, again, it's the argument of, you know, those that, like President Biden, who advocate for more control on people not being, not having access to the firearms themselves. So as you know, it's a very heated debate between two camps, and that's where ultimately the result is the same thing, whether or not it's the individual that, you know, causes an incident like this, or whether or not it's the gun that causes an incident like this. Ultimately, innocent lives are lost. So yes, you know, that is an issue that will come up in conversation, the gun violence issue, but this issue will also come up in conversations about how the mental health crisis wasn't possibly addressed, again, depending on what the motives of this individual was, and also whether or not, you know, those undetonated devices were related to the individual who carried out this shooting or not. So again, is this a twofold incident? Is this a counter-terrorism terrorism problem and a shooting problem and a mental health problem, or are they all related? Was it just a terrorist attack? You know, there are so many variables to this question, but the timing is definitely peculiar. It does come at a time when several people were injured by a person who got shot a day after the president wanted to pass a law limiting ghost guns. So yes, you know, you can argue from that perspective as well.
There is visibly a lot of panic in New York City. Well, probably, Susan Teherani, you can tell us, is there any further information or more information from the police department regarding this incident?
Yeah, just in case our viewers are just joining us, we do know right now that 13 people have been injured, and the panic and the concern right now is the person that shot them or caused this injury is still at large, and the suspect fled the scene and is said to have been wearing a construction suit and a gas mask. So there's a manhunt underway for that individual. It happened at the 36th Street station in Brooklyn. Smoke devices set off on the train when the gunman opened fire, and there is no active explosive devices at the scene as of now, but the scene has been cordoned off to pedestrian traffic, also vehicle traffic. As we mentioned, the N and R train, which are very busy trains, have been also shut off. Not only the Sunset Park train that the incident happened in, because of that active manhunt that's underway to find that individual in question. So those are the updates that we have right now, and the NYPD is putting out a tip asking if anyone has any information or eyewitness accounts to call 1-800-577-TIPS. So, you know, asking for good Samaritans to chime in, ask individuals to help identify this individual if they do have any information. And we just constantly see photos from eyewitness accounts coming on social media, some of them very gruesome. Individuals lying with blood on the platform, which initially came out, and that's when authorities got that 911 call at around 8:27 a.m. local time that several people had been shot at the Sunset Park, Brooklyn train station, and that help was needed.
That's right. Now, according to the fire department in New York City, they say that they responded to a call for smoke at the station and found multiple gunshot victims. No details were immediately available on the undetonated devices, and like the police department has clarified that there were no undetonated devices found at the scene of crime. Now, photos posted on social media showed people bloodied on the platform, like Susan Teherani has mentioned. Do we have details, Susan, about the people who were injured in this incident?
We do know that they've been transferred to the hospital, these 13 individuals. Details about them haven't come out yet to the public. Usually they wait for their families and those close to them to be informed initially, and then we will get more information about them. The fear right now is whether or not there'll be any fatalities reported and anyone has been killed due to their wounds. We haven't gotten any report regarding that, but I do want to let you know that we do have some revised details coming in. Eric, if you may, I can read them to you.
Go on.
A gunman so a gunman wearing a gas mask and orange construction vest is on the run indeed in Brooklyn after shooting 13 people on that packed subway train in Sunset Park during rush hour on Tuesday. This was shortly before 8:30 a.m. At around 8:27 a.m. I mean, that is rush hour. That is when the trains are packed here in New York, people going to and from work, to their workspace. The gunman is believed to have thrown a smoke bomb into a southbound R train at the 25th Street station in Brooklyn and started shooting as the doors of the train closed. It's unclear if he shot from the 25th Street station platform or he was also on the train. And now, as we mentioned, we know that those horrifying videos and photos really show them within around the blood-stained 36th train platform station. Those were the individuals. Initially, we saw those photos that were waiting to be taken to the hospital. They are now taken to the hospitals. And one eyewitness claimed that the accused fired too many rounds to count. But it's not clear what kind of weapon he was using. This is according to an eyewitness account. We cannot verify that. The gunman was described by the New York Post as being a 5'5" black man, weighing about 170 pounds. Someone said that he thought he was an MTA worker, possibly, a train worker, a person that worked at the transportation department, possibly because he was wearing that construction suit and the gas mask.
This photo.
And then, witness said, I thought he was an
Susan, sorry to cut you short. These videos and photos were shared widely on social media. How would you describe the response of the fire department and also the police department in New York City when they, reached the scene of this incident? How would you describe their response?
Yeah, the fire department and the NYPD, I mean, they are the best of the best. They really are the finest in the country. First of all, the New York Police Department is the largest force in the country. They train the rest of the country in operations like these, even, and I say this with a grain of salt, in counterterrorism measures. So they are very fast in responding to issues like this, not only because of the experience that they have, but because of the way Manhattan and New York is located, just because, it's around it has water around it. It's a hub, and they're very well prepared. They got the call at around 8:27. They were on the scene immediately. They not only responded from a law enforcement perspective, but they know that during these times, unfortunately, because New York has had attacks like this before, counterterrorism operations work hand in hand with law enforcement in New York. That's almost a given, despite the fact that, we don't want to get into the politics, but there were administrations before where they wanted to separate the two because of some political aspects of it. But then they realized that, after 9/11, these two need to work together. And I think we saw that happening here as well. Very fast response, and that's why these individuals were transferred to the hospital quickly. But at this point, I think because this one individual is at large, the city is somewhat in a state of panic and is at a standstill. I mean, those two train lines that I mentioned, the N and R train, I can't tell you how crucial they are for people in New York to get around with. They're pretty, they're lines that really go across all over New York. So for them to stop and this manhunt to continue because of them, it really puts the city in a difficult place, and maybe people's routes, to reroute in a peculiar situation. But yeah, their response has always been on point, and I think right now the test will be for New York Mayor Eric Adams, who just came into office. It's his first 100 days, and not to fault of his own, but he's dealing with a COVID diagnosis, so we'll have to see how he's going to manage this.
Susan, in your own view, what do you think needs to happen in America right now? Or what does the American government need to do to address this gun violence epidemic in America?
Yeah. The gun violence epidemic is an issue that has really a passionate partisan debate in the country. On the one hand, you have people that really respect their Second Amendment rights, their gun rights, and then you have the other hand of individuals that really see this as an urban problem and see it as something that needs to be controlled. They really focus on the gun aspect of it, where on the other side of the coin you have individuals that argue that it's people that kill people and it's not just the gun device itself. So, one aspect say that you have to deal with other issues of individuals like their mental health problems, their criminal records. Those are the people that these guns shouldn't go in the hands of because of the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And then you have others that say that no, there should just be more government control on who has a gun. Right. And for a lot of Americans, the minute the issue of government control comes into question, then people back up. And that's why this debate has been in such a gridlock for so long. And as you know, when things become political in Washington, then, it all goes haywire. But put the politics aside. Right. There has been a rise in gun violence and crime in New York City that's just astronomical. I mean, shootings in New York City have risen this year, and the uptick in violence and gun crimes has been a central focus of Eric Adams since he took office in January. And through April 3rd, shooting incidents rose from 260 to 296 compared with the same period last year. This is according to police department statistics. So, this is a challenge that Eric Adams has. Right. But on the other hand, it's also the high crime rate is a problem that Eric Adams has because of other issues. It's not just that gun issue. And I think that's where the problem lies in dealing with gun problems. The reason it doesn't get resolved is because other back issues don't get resolved. For example, like poverty, like homelessness, like mental health issues. And when you just focus on the gun aspect of it, then, it sort of goes in a hamster wheel, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And actually, according to the U.S. president, he says that these guns are the weapons of choice for many criminals. We are going to do everything we can to deprive them of that choice. Do you think President Biden will be able to, eradicate this menace, eradicate this epidemic?
Well, President Biden focuses on one aspect of these guns. On the other hand, he doesn't think about the farmers who own guns in faraway places in the middle of America that use their guns to protect themselves when they live in places that aren't secure, as like a place like New York City. So when you have blanket policies on guns for the entire country, obviously you're not going to get the support that you want in Washington. A lot of the politicians he's trying to gain the support from are from constituents from middle America, where they don't live in urban areas like the one behind me, where houses are so close to each other and you only focus on guns that are used for criminal activities. These are individuals that live in large swaths of lands that farm, that sometimes have that weapon as a means to protect themselves and their families because they have no other means of security in case someone comes and invades them. I'm just giving you an example of why it's so difficult to have a blanket policy on gun control in the United States. So it's very difficult for President Biden to stand there in front of the American people and present the gun problem as just an urban American, New York City, California problem, when there are 40 other some states that these politicians have to go through and convince their constituents that the president is going to come and have a blanket gun policy and, quote, take your guns away. So it's a tough task. It's a difficult task to deal with.
Susan Teherani, stay with me. I'll give an update to our viewers. If you're just joining us, this is live in New York City. At least 13 people were shot or otherwise hit by shrapnel on multiple subway stations along the northbound N train line in Brooklyn this morning. Now, a manhunt is underway for a gunman described as wearing a gas mask and an orange construction vest. At least 4 of the victims were found at the 36th Street subway station in Sunset Park and another at the 25th Street station in Greenwood Heights just before 8:30 a.m. It wasn't immediately clear whether the shootings took place on the train or in the stations. And our correspondent in New York City is Susan Teherani. Susan, is there any more update or new update at this hour?
So what we're seeing is videos on the scene right now coming in for us, and I do want to let you know that they're just and you're probably seeing these videos along with me. They show that there are so many security and bomb squads and counterterrorism units and NYPD units in and around that vicinity, that it really gives you a sense of how detrimental this is, not only to the vicinity of Brooklyn, to secure not only that train station, surrounding areas, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and New York as well, and why this attack was so important to get under control as soon as possible for a city like New York. As we mentioned for you, these reports are coming out from various quarters. We do have a lot of eyewitness accounts that we can't really verify on our own, but we do know that, for example, one eyewitness account said that he initially thought that the shooter was an MTA worker, a Transportation Authority worker, because he was wearing that orange construction suit and a gas mask. Yeah, which now we know that wasn't the case.
All right, Susan Teherani, thank you very much for that update. If you're just joining us, this is live in New York City. At least 13 people were shot or otherwise hit by shrapnel on multiple subway stations along the northern-bound N train line in Brooklyn this morning. A manhunt is underway for a gunman described as wearing a gas mask and an orange construction vest. We will be keeping our eye on the developments in New York City. You are watching WION Wild is One.